We're not filming, are we?
I was wondering. I was like, I wonder
know,
when
I
he's
was
gonna
gonna
start.
ask. No, perfect. Hey, for the one person at home, probably my mom watching. Hello. This is the third episode. We'll call it the Untitled podcast because I haven't come up with a name for it yet. We're here with our esteemed guest, the Anna Snap, who is an actor / performer, a mental health advocate, body positivity advocate, an actual one-woman show, certified peer counselor. Let me know if I got anything wrong. Financial researcher, and TikTok and Instagram extraordinaire. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
This is a very momentous occasion.
It's huge.
Huge. Sure. So right off the bat, jumping into it, PTSD. How would you say that it has impacted your life?
Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't had active PTSD in about 10 years. So, it's not a part of my life anymore in terms of the acute, symptoms of it. However, I do think, like, obviously many people have said before me, I'm not the first person to say it. Trauma lives in the body. It lives in the brain. So even if you are not actively experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, you are working for the rest of your life to unlearn certain ways that the trauma has affected you and continue to sort of peel back those layers. So, when I had, my background with trauma is a little complex. So it wasn't just, I did experience sexual trauma, but I also experienced years and years and years of being very heavily in the medical system, going through traumatic, medical experiences. I have 4 chronic illnesses I live with, or have experienced many medical issues, but I live with Crohn's disease, history of Lyme disease. I have fibromyalgia. I did experience a lot of issues with autoimmune pancreatitis. And then besides that, lots of infections, parasites, H. pylori, candida, E. coli, C. diff, all of these huge infections. And it was one of those things where it really manifested all at once. So my mental health issues and my physical health issues were sort of in this big storm. Okay. And so I think when you are so young, I got sick first when I was 18, and experienced my first sexual trauma when I was 19. When you're that young, your brain is not fully developed and you're sort of being passed around at the hospital. You're being poked and prodded. You're in this really intense environment where not only are you in physical pain and emotional pain, and you're going through these uncomfortable medical tests, and there's lots of also unanswered questions, misdiagnosing, doctors looking me straight in the eye and saying, I don't know how to help you. I can't do this. Meanwhile, my bipolar disorder was manifesting, and the PTSD actually, the trauma was in my body, but I didn't get PTSD till about, I guess about 4.5, 5 years into all of this starting. So my brain and body really said, no, like, we're not going to process this right now. You're going to stop. You're just going to go into survival mode, very much sort of like dissociated. And then it sort of hit me. And I will say that PTSD, out of everything I've experienced, and I've experienced a lot, is the scariest thing I've ever gone through.
How so?
It really, there is no sense of hope when you have PTSD, in my experience. And, everyone experiences trauma differently. So I don't want to speak for anyone else but myself, but it feels like you're at a war with the world, and you're at a war with your mind and your body, and there's no getting out of it. And nothing anyone can tell you will convince you that you're going to get out of it alive. And I sincerely thought I was going to die from it, whether it was going to be, I was going to kill myself, or I was going to die from the pain. And it really does feel that your body is like buzzing with fear, with like self-hatred, with anxiety, all of these things. And it's just so terrifying to not be yourself. So, and I think a big thing I like to sort of emphasize in these discussions about trauma is that it's so different for every person. So you may talk to another person tomorrow who also had PTSD, maybe from similar experiences that I had, and they're going to have experienced it in a really different way. There's connecting factors, but we're all different. But, you know, I think it's been a long time of me reclaiming my body, reclaiming my relationship with my body, knowing I'm safe in my body, that I'm no longer being betrayed by my body or violated in my body. And that on its own is sort of what I'm talking about when I say like peeling back those layers of how trauma has affected me. So while I'm not having flashbacks or nightmares, I can drive now. I'm not dissociating. Every time I'm in therapy, I'm sort of like, oh yeah, this is another way that it's affecting me still. And how can I target that and remind myself of who I am and return back to that sort of like foundation. Yeah.
How would you feel? How would you say that you've reclaimed your body?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Because my body didn't feel like mine for so long, whether it was violated by medical trauma or sexual trauma, being able to feel more both like physically and emotionally in my body. So something that is a very big part of my journey is that I gained weight from being on steroids for so long. And I think there was also a period of my time where I was engaging in disordered eating. I was convinced, this was over 10 years ago, that if I ate and I got fat, that men wouldn't want to touch me after I had been, assaulted. And I've now actually sort of deconstructed that in knowing that fat is not a bad word. And being, no matter what size you are, you can still be a victim of this.
Sure.
Doesn't matter what you look like. It's not about that. And I think I spent so long thinking fat was a bad word, thinking that there are good bodies and bad bodies. And now I'm actually the biggest I've ever been due to being on so many meds that make me gain weight, steroid use, all of this stuff. And I'm the happiest and healthiest I've ever been. And because I've deconstructed that idea of fat phobia. For me, I'd rather be on these, bipolar medications that keep me stable and able to work and be with friends and have healthy relationships and maybe be in a bigger body than be thinner and unhappy. And that's also not to say that you shouldn't be taking care of your body in lots of ways, you know, but yeah, so it's just feeling more empowered and more happy and confident. I think the way I walk into a room now is very different than the way I used to walk into a room. I didn't want to take up space physically or metaphorically, and now I'm ready to take up space. And I think that translates differently. Do you know what I mean?
No, I think that's the thing too. You have certain people and you kind of feel when they walk into a room, even if you're not looking at them, it's like that can be for better, for worse, right?
Sure,
but you feel the energy. Who is that? It's like you can feel the energy kind of shift.
Yeah, for sure.
In the room. What advice would you give to somebody who's going through sexual traumas right now? Is there any advice that you would give them? Anything that you would say to them?
Yeah. I don't want to give the same advice that everyone gives when they say it gets better, because I think depending on where you are in your healing journey, it gets better can feel to the person, the survivor, as dismissive of their experience, you know? And everyone has a different timeline for when it gets better. And even when it is at a better place, you're still living with that every day. There's not a day I don't think about it. And I'm not actively triggered or activated by it, but I think about it every day. It's not consuming my mind. It's not distracting me from living my life, but it's a part of me. It lives in me. So I guess I would say to people who are maybe in the earlier parts of their healing journey, specifically, that, there is going to be a day where you will feel in your body again and you'll feel safe in your body. And it may not happen today or tomorrow, but it can. And I feel like I am at one of many examples of being someone who never thought it would get better. You could not convince me. And this is something that also is another topic that's related, but I know that mental health resources are not accessible for everyone,
Right,
depending on a number of things. I really get it. I was privileged enough to have the ability to go to therapy at a young age and go to residential mental health treatment when I had PTSD. Mm-hmm. That's an incredible privilege that I do not take for granted. And I'm very aware of that. If there is the ability to get help, mental from a mental health professional, I would recommend it, because there is a certain level of work and deconstructing that trauma that your friends and family may not be equipped to help you with.
Yeah.
And I did experience a lot of loss of people in my life because I was not doing well. And I was too much, I was too much to handle by a lot of people. So I hope that the people that are going through this right now, I hope that if they do have some form of community, whether it's a friend or a parent or whoever, to hold on to them and, remember that like it's the community too that's going to build you back up. It's not just, and it won't even just be the therapist. Mm-hmm. The friends and family that stuck with me through this, like there's an unbreakable sense of gratitude that I have for them and will for the rest of my life.
Huh. Yeah, that is beautiful. I think that is true when people say that it does take a village. They say that to raise a child, but I do feel that as life goes on, I feel like a lot of that's kind of thrown away. But I think also too that village too might not actually be your actual family. Your family might not actually be your actual, you know what I mean? You don't, no one really gets to choose your family, right?
Yeah.
And not everyone's fortunate enough to, as they get older, the person that they become, whatever they're aligned with, that the family that they're born with actually understands who they are, is actually able to, maybe foster and carry those relationships. So I do think that is highly, highly important, that community aspect. We are wired. I mean, you look at people who are in probably the most dangerous prisons in the world. What's the worst punishment you can have? Solitary confinement, being locked in a steel room where no one's in there. So that is definitely, that's huge.
And, kind of relating to that, that idea of raising a child, it takes a village to raise a child. There's this whole concept, obviously, in therapy about your inner child. And when you are traumatized, there are, parts of us that go back to that inner child. And I think that is sort of this like beautiful metaphor and like full circle moment of like, when you do experience something that traumatizes you, you are sort of in your most like raw, vulnerable, young state. You can be set off by things that you may not be set off as an adult if you were in maybe more of your stable mindset. So, it's funny. It does take a village to raise a child, and it takes a village to continue to survive for the rest of your life,
For sure. I think they had a quote in Black Panther. They said a kid that's not accepted or is ostracized by the village will eventually come back to burn it down.
Yeah.
I think I got that quote correct. It sounded a lot cooler in my head. I don't know if it did.
I think I remember what you're talking about.
That.
Well, because it's these things affect. It's when you're at a young, impressionable age, and given the stuff that I went through started when I was 18. I was young. I wasn't as young as some people who experience true childhood traumas, but I was still so young. And I sometimes think back to it where, I was in Philly for a lot of the time that I was very sick. And I'm now returned back 10 years later, and I'm having this new relationship with the city because it represented for so long how sick I was. Loss of friends, loss of my mind and my body. And now I'm back, and it's like, oh yeah, when I was at the hospital, I was alone in a hospital room when I was 19. Like, that is young. That is really young to go through that and like be navigating college and be navigating, just being a young woman, and not even really a woman. I remember when we were kids, we used to think college students were like full adults, and I'm 33. Do I feel like an adult? No.
No, I don't think it's ever going to.
I don't know. Will I be 70 feeling like an adult?
No,
Doubtful.
I feel like it gets pushed back even more. You're like, once I'm like 18, then it'll feel, then you're 18, you're like,
nope.
It's like a constant thing of like imposter syndrome.
Yep.
I feel like, like even if you're like 65, it's like, oh, maybe if I'm 85 or something, 105. So
I'm going to be on my deathbed being like,
Not really.
I don't think I ever got there.
Not really.
Yeah.
So you said Crohn's disease?
Yeah. So that, I would say that's sort of the primary illness that is, it's been sort of the center point of a lot of the other health issues.
For the people that don't know what that, could you please explain?
Yeah. So Crohn's disease is an inflammatory disease of the gastrointestinal system. It can affect everywhere from the mouth to the anus. And most people experience gastrointestinal issues related to their colon, small intestine, stomach. And so I was diagnosed when I was 18. I went to college. Things were pretty good. I started getting various sort of weird symptoms, pushed them back, ignored it, because sometimes our bodies do weird stuff. I think I just sort of, I was in the throes of early freshman year, you know. I ended up getting into the hospital and I had pancreatitis and Crohn's disease at the same time. And for the next several years, Crohn's, I actually am just in remission for the first time in 15 years as of a few months ago. Yeah, it's big news. And, you know, tons of colonoscopies, tests, blood work, doctor's appointments, hospitalizations, and there is a misconception about Crohn's disease. So it's called inflammatory bowel disease, and two diseases within that umbrella are Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. They affect different parts of the gastrointestinal system. But basically, there is this sort of, joke that it's the pooping disease. That's what people assume when they hear about IBD or IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, which a lot of people have just sort of reactions to food and all those things. But because your gut is literally the brain of the body, your gut and brain are made out of some of the same matter. So, you know, when people say your gut instinct, that's because the same neurotransmitters that are released in your brain are released in your gut or released in your brain. There is connective tissue. And so your mind and body are so connected that when you experience Crohn's, it affects your mental health too. Yeah. It's not just, you know, having loose bowels, it's stomach pain, it's joint pain, it's, you know, it affects, you know, depression. You can have a lot of different deficiencies, you know, there's just so many ways that it affects you, fatigue. And, you know, I think with all of these sort of keywords that describe what it is, you have to imagine that when you have an autoimmune disorder, which it's attacking your immune system, it's like the most accentuated version of what maybe the average person experiences. So for instance, fatigue is not being tired, you know, depression is not sadness. Nausea and vomiting is not the same as when you have the stomach flu for 24 hours, you know, it's all these extreme versions of it. And so I went on so many meds. It also ended up creating other sort of gastrointestinal infections in my body. So, you know, it was a long time of experimenting with meds, treatments, doctors, and then finally I'm in remission from a new medication that actually just got approved for Crohn's in the last year or two.
That's great.
Yeah. So it's crazy. But, you know, what's interesting too is that a lot of people, when they have PTSD, their gastrointestinal symptoms get worse.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's, you know, and they, you know, have done obviously a lot of studies on, for instance, like, you know, veterans from the military who come back and all of a sudden develop gastrointestinal issues because their body and mind are both in such distress.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense too, because when you think about when you're really nervous or something, I know people, you can give yourself an ulcer or, you know, high blood pressure, hypertension literally stems from probably something in your mind telling you something's not right. Yeah. We're an evolutionary response. Something's not right. We're in danger. We're getting ready to, you know, there's no animal out there, but it's telling you that, you know, maybe thousands of years ago, there's some big animal out there that we might have to get ready to fight. So your body's getting ready to rev it up. But the problem is that response happens over and over and over again through a normal day. It's going to probably deplete your body's natural ability to achieve like homeostasis or just just be. So it's going to, throw everything out of whack.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is I sometimes wonder what it would be like if I were diagnosed with Crohn's in 2024 versus 2009, because there was we've come so far in the way we see gut health. But when I was diagnosed, the mind and body were still considered such different entities, and they're really not. Right. And so this whole experience I've had with my mental and physical health is just one thing. Mm-hmm. You can't separate them. You can't be like, it's sort of which came first, the chicken or the egg. Am I depressed because I'm sick, or am I sick because I'm depressed? I don't know. Right, how can you say which started first, Yeah,
I definitely agree. How was being diagnosed with bipolar 1? How would you say that's affected your life?
Yeah, it was a bit of a slow burn until it wasn't. I started having mental health issues as a young kid. I started experiencing anxiety and depression when I was 10, maybe even a little younger. I went on meds for ADHD and anxiety and depression by the time I was 12 or 13. And then slowly over time, the depression, was a major factor in high school. I think bipolar disorder, which is, characterized by bouts of mania or depression. And for those who don't know what mania is, it's, very extreme highs. And obviously depression can be extreme lows. And the scary thing about bipolar is that the switch between the two is just like, instead of you living right here, like you said, at homeostasis, mania is up here and depression's down here. So you're not just going back to normal. You're dropping, going back and forth. And
would that mean when the highs, would that be like a positive emotion, or is that just energy wise?
Yeah. I mean, it's, it's interesting. The word positive is an interesting word to describe it, because it's terrifyingly euphoric. It's, when I experienced mania, it really did start to happen in college. And that's when they sort of knew it wasn't just major depressive disorder, it was bipolar. And, it can be characterized by a lot of different things, but not being able to sleep. And the thing about bipolar is the less you sleep, the harder it is to then go to sleep, because it just fuels the mania. A lot of people will go into psychosis or into manic episodes when they don't have sleep. So as a person with bipolar, I have to really make sure I'm getting sleep. It is not anything to play around with. But, I would spend a lot of money. I would have an excessive amount of energy. I would be completely sort of, in some moments, I was out of my mind ambitious, sort of like these grandiose visions for my life. I literally thought I was going to take over Poland one time. Like, it was that wild, where I thought I was going to backpack to Poland. How am I going to backpack across the ocean? I don't know. It seemed legit in my manic phase. I thought I was going to backpack there and like take over. And that's, by the way, for anyone viewing this, no intention of doing that in my right mind. Right. But, it was that kind of like, I can do anything. I can beat anything. But you're also almost like kind of aware in the back of your head that you're like, this is not right. Yeah. And then when you crash from it, it feels so bad. And there's also another thing that happens that I would experience a lot is hypomania. So it's sort of a mixed state is what they call it. It's sort of a combination of depression and mania. And it is, that's where I think the terrifyingly euphoric feeling comes in, where you're like, I hate myself. I hate this and I hate everything, but this is also great, but I'm also this, but I'm also that. And you're in this like spiral in your head of like, I don't know what to feel. I'm feeling both. I'm feeling one. I'm feeling both. And that kind of even talking that pace is so related to that energy that you have when you're having an episode. If we were having a talk right now and I was actually manic, I would not be talking at this speed. I would not be able to hear what you said. I would not be able to answer your questions, and you would never be able to get a single sound or word in. And so positive is an interesting word, because it's almost like you sort of think it's positive, but it's only for you, not a single other person. It's pretty scary. So once I started to experience those highs and then those lows and the drop between the two, they realized that I had bipolar. And another aspect of that, which I think happens with a lot of people, is that typically at a younger age, depression is more common than to have the manic episodes. And so if you're on antidepressants, which is a class of medication, you cannot, when you're bipolar, you cannot be on antidepressants.
Why not?
Because antidepressants, and I'm not sure about the full science of this, but they can cause more mania. So it wasn't helping that I was on the antidepressants that had been diagnosed. So part of my experience in mental health treatment and psychiatric treatment was waning off those antidepressants and getting on mood stabilizers and atypical antipsychotics, which are treated, you know, an atypical antipsychotic, it treats bipolar, it treats schizophrenia, and those, you know, target those parts of the brain to calm down the mania, you know, and also obviously calm down the depression. But yeah, it was sort of insane. And I think with everything I've experienced, I almost like don't think it's real still.
How so?
Like
Like it seems too surreal.
It's so surreal. It's almost like I was in a dream.
Okay, I see what you mean.
And it doesn't, I'm so good now. Like I feel so fine that it's almost like, wow, that really was a different era of my life.
Yeah.
That really, I thought I was going to die. And I could have died. Mm-hmm. I tried to kill myself once. And, you know, I can't believe I'm here. You know, I really can't believe I'm here because, and that sort of goes back to what you said about like, what would you suggest to people who are going through maybe a trauma or something like that, is that there is living proof around you, even if the people aren't talking about it, that you can survive this. Because I think that's a big thing, is people aren't talking about mental illness.
For sure.
It is much easier for me. It is much easier for someone to come up to me and be like, oh, I have Crohn's too, than to be like, I'm also bipolar, because it's this hush, hush, don't talk about it. You know, especially what we see in the media is if there's a school shooting, automatically it's, oh, they're mentally ill, they're bipolar. I will say there's bipolar manifests in people in different ways, but I've never been violent in my life. I've never had the urge to hurt people. And with meds and therapy, I'm a completely stable person. It's like night and day. Yeah. And so the idea that what we're fed in the media about mental illness is really damaging, because so many people experience it. Nowadays, it's like, you know, everyone's dealing with anxiety or depression or something, or at least more people are talking about it. Mm-hmm. And it should be, I need those meds just as much as I need my meds for Crohn's and fibromyalgia, you know?
Good. No, I definitely agree. I think the person that would really scare me, the person who I'm afraid of, is like, nope, everything's perfectly fine. That's the person who I feel is like Hannibal Lecter or something, where it's like, nope, I'm fine. I've never feel this, never. I was like, never. That's the person that's like eating people.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the person that scares me a lot, where I'm like,
Yeah, you're like, your face is a little bit too straight right now.
Like
you're
everything, nothing ever.
There's no intonation in your voice. This is terrifying. Yeah, it's almost, and it's true. It's like I connect more with people who are like, not to overuse the word vulnerable, but are like willing to be like, hey, I'm not okay right now, and I'm working through some stuff, and I respect that and admire that and cherish that more than when people try to stuff it down. I will say, though, to come from a more trauma-informed and empathetic perspective, we don't all have the privilege of being able to talk about these things. We don't all have the families who taught us that it was okay to talk about these things, or the schooling, or maybe the environment or culture we grew up in. So, you know, it's not as simple as just letting go one day and talking about it. But I wish that there was more encouragement, and I think it's getting better.
For sure.
But I think that I wish more people saw talking about your struggles as a strength, and not as a weakness. Right.
I 1,000. I agree with you so much. I would say probably within the past, I think it's probably been within the past 10 years or so, just the word mental health. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to think when I was in high school, or maybe just 10 years ago, I haven't seen that word used as much now as it is. I think it was more like a pseudoscience thing. It's like, oh, mental, like nobody really talked about depression. I mean, but here's the thing. it's always been there. You know, it's people have always been depressed. There's always been bouts of depression, people who might have been bipolar, but it's just, I guess, society maybe, I don't know if I would say opening up, but just, you can ignore it all you want to, but it's there.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost, I would almost liken it to this, to where it's always the generational thing. And we'll use maybe sexuality or something in a sense where people say, you know, back in the day, you know, there wasn't gay people. I said, no, they've been
around since the beginning of time.
That's like, it's been, this has always been there. Just like, it just wasn't accepted. People just did their things behind closed doors, or they unfortunately might have had whole families. He might have been gay, but you know, it's always, it didn't just pop up in 2024. You know what I mean?
And, you know, I think that every time we see something happen, like someone's family member commits suicide, or even a celebrity, and I have a whole lot of thoughts about how people talk about that stuff, but there is often this like narrative of like, I had no idea, or why didn't they just come to me, or I should have checked in on them, or all these things. And it is because there isn't always the open door to allowing people to talk about it. Yeah. And there's also a lot of shame involved. Yeah. Because do people, you know, I mean, people thought I was crazy, you know, and I'm not saying that I wasn't acting crazy at times, but there, you know, it's just, people do think you're insane, and or they think that like, just go on a walk, you know, just take a bubble bath, just get over it, be happy, chin up, you choose to be happy. It is not that simple. And I do think that there is an aspect of my life now where I'm like, yeah, I make an active choice to find things I'm grateful for, find the little joys in life, even when I'm having a hard time, because psych meds are not perfect. I still struggle with things, but I'm not on that sort of hyperactive and depressive, you know, mode. But I think that it's not simple for someone who's experiencing mental health struggles or mental illness to just be like, yeah, chin up. It's not that simple. And I think people think it is.
So probably once it's at a certain point, it could be, but I think there are people too who are dealing with chemical imbalance. It's like there's not, you're not going to be able to think your way out of a chemical imbalance. And I think a lot of times when people are saying, oh, just go for a walk or go here or there, I think what they might be expressing is people who are past a certain point, or maybe it's not as deep. There are certain people, it's, you know, like you can't tell a person with schizophrenia, oh, it's just all in your head.
Yeah.
Like you're just gonna tell them it's like you can tell them that there's nobody there, there's no one talking to them, but in their head they can hear it. Yeah, they can feel it. So I liken it to I don't know. Have you ever seen the movie The Soloist?
No,
with
I
Robert
haven't.
Downey Jr. and Jamie Foxx.
Oh no, I haven't.
It's about this guy who was a violin player, and I forgot what the name of the orchestra was. It was in L.A. Brilliant guy. And then I think maybe halfway through his second semester of college, he starts to have schizophrenic episodes and stuff. And so he drops out, but then eventually he's just this guy. It's a true story. He's on the streets of LA, homeless. And there's this guy just playing the violin, or I forget which instrument he's playing, better than probably anyone could ever do. And he's schizophrenic. And he befriends this guy. I'm totally spoiling the movie, by the way. So it's called The Soloist. So if you haven't seen it, yeah, I'm spoiling the movie. But it gets to a point where him and Robert Downey Jr. become friends. And he wants to put him back out there. Say, hey, dude, the world's got to hear your music. And just like one day he just snapped. He just like threatened to kill Robert Downey Jr. and stuff, because it just, the voices and the people, and it's real. Yeah. Like you can't just say, hey man, you know, just snap out of it. It's not. So I think for a lot of people, they have the privilege of saying, yeah, for there's a good chunk of people who it's not going to be that serious for, where it's like, you know what, most of the time you're fine. You just take a walk. Yeah, you probably will. But there is also a large chunk to where you can take a walk, you could take a hike, you could take a flight. It's not going to,
it's not going to change it. And
it's
not
going to make a difference.
It's sort of, if you think about, you know, obviously there's the classic glass half full, glass half empty.
Right.
If you think about people who have a chemical imbalance in their brain as
Right.
people who just have a completely empty glass, there's not even a drop of water. So there's not even the ability to see it as
Exactly.
half full because, you know, we haven't even gotten to the kitchen where the water is.
Exactly. Right.
We haven't been able to get near the sink.
Yeah.
And we need those meds to just help us walk our ass to the kitchen and take the Brita filter out of the fridge. You know, it's like, we do need that extra help the same way that a diabetic needs insulin. You know, you're not going to tell a diabetic to just get over it. They'll be fine without their insulin. And I'm just such a firm believer in taking these psychiatric meds if you need them, because they are life-changing, and they're not magic, but they're life-changing.
When you were diagnosed with bipolar 1, did you tell a lot of people? Did you kind of keep it to yourself? And did you kind of fear the stigma of what may be behind it, how kind of people may perceive you now?
The reason I'm laughing is because I am so not a subtle person. So like,
Okay.
I think I was telling people, you know, I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I think my behavior was very obvious to people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard to remember that far back because also, like I said, it was sort of a slow burn that then sort of like snowballed. Mm-hmm. So I had already experienced mental health issues for years prior. So it wasn't the same thing as like waking up one day and being like, I have bipolar. But I think that people knew, and I think I was telling them, but I think the way I talked about it was different than I talk about it now. I mean, I can't even fully remember how I was engaging in like discourse about it. But I think one of the biggest shifts that I've had personally over the last 15 years is it's almost like, because like we said, like I'm able to see the world through a different lens, through that more like glass half full, like lens. And what I mean by that is, so what I'm about to say, I want to preface this with, I don't believe in putting a blanket over the mentally ill community by saying like you're playing the victim. But at that point in my life, you have to recognize that like it was not just the bipolar manifesting. I was ill from chronic disease, and I had PTSD, and I was going through a lot. And so the mental state I was in was very much, why me? Why me? Right. And so I think because that's how I was seeing the world, that inspired the way that I talked about my issues. It was very much, why me? Because I felt like, why can't I just be in school? Why can't I just graduate? Why can't I work? Yeah. Why can't I do these things that my friends are doing around me? And it felt I was a victim, and both in a truthful way and also in a mental way. And now I see it as like, I don't know, it's kind of my superpower. And before it was my weakness. Right. And now I see the way that going through these hardships and these traumas have allowed me to see people and humanity with more empathy, love myself more deeply, be more resilient. And those are gifts that cannot be replaced. And before, it was, because it was in its acute stage, it was a weapon against me. And now it's like my, it's in my skill set or something. Like, it's just like, I've flipped the way I see it.
Definitely agree. I do have a weird question to ask. And it doesn't have to do anything. Do you have to use the restroom or anything?
Oh, no, I'm actually good.
Okay, cool. We're just going to keep rolling.
Yeah.
Then. Okay.
Thank you, though. I totally forgot.
I just, bladders need love too. But, so there is word on the street that you do have a one-woman show.
Yeah.
And it is called I Found That the Sun Will Rise Tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So how'd you come up with that?
Well, so I think I mentioned earlier, I was in residential treatment for, mental health issues. So in 2013, in September of 2013, I left for a residential mental health treatment center in Illinois. And this center sort of focused on everything from, mood disorders, trauma, eating disorders. And this was not what I was there for, but they also, helped women with drug and alcohol, substance use. And the thing is that all of these things are often co-occurring. So you're normally, at treatment, we all sort of had at least two of the issues, something in our cocktail was all different, but it was not just a one ingredient cocktail. And you don't have phones, you don't have TV, you are in therapy groups all day. You're with a lot of other women. It was a women's center. So you're with people all day. You're bonding with these people in an incredible way. You are, you have a lot of time to knit and think and cry. I'm not going to lie. And so I was journaling a lot.
Okay.
I remember one day in art therapy session, in an art therapy class, which I really enjoyed, we were just I think we were just doing like a free art session. So, if you wanted to make a collage, paint, pottery, whatever. And I was like, I'll make a collage, why not? Your sense of time and it is a little different when you're in residential treatment. And so I was cutting out words and I happened to cut out the words all separate. I found that the sun will rise tomorrow. And I remember
by
making
accident.
I found random words and put it together. I painted a sort of a sunrise and I didn't put much thought into it. I was like, oh, I like this. I still have the canvas. And I went back to treatment a couple years later once my PTSD had sort of like really come out. And I went to a different treatment center in Arizona and actually back to this one in Illinois and more journal entries. And I remember thinking as I was coming out of the PTSD, I was like, I'm an actor and I'm a writer. And I was like, I think there was this like desire to like tell my story. There was a desire to do that. And so it began by using journal entries and obviously sort of tweaking them and not dramatizing them in terms of changing them, the content, but just making them more like theater friendly. Changing maybe how I phrased things because it's not just for my personal diary, it's for an audience. And sort of came together. And what's funny is that the first draft was in 2015. And I handed it to my mentor at the time, David Minton, who sort of helped raise me in a theater company growing up. And I sent him the script and he was like, let's meet for lunch, chat about it, because he was going to direct the first iteration of it. And he sort of slides the script back across the table. And he was like, Anna, you cannot put this on. There is not a single funny moment in it. And you cannot make your audience cry for an hour. You need humor. You need humor in it. Okay. He was like, there's not and like, I know this conversation is a bit more heavy, but I consider myself a funny person. I was like, you're right. I cannot we need humor to cope. It is what has helped me cope. And so I did rewrites, and the first iteration was in Maryland in Silver Spring at the Silver Spring Black Box. And then I ended up sort of doing the Capitol Fringe in DC, the Edinburgh Fringe in Scotland. Later, I performed it off Broadway at the United Solo Theater Festival in New York City on Theater Row. Another fun thing that happened is in 2016, when this big summer of festivals was first happening. I had made like a Facebook business page for this show, which, LOL throwback, like business pages on Facebook are sort of like not the same as they were. Yeah. And this woman named Lisa, Facebook messaged me and she was like, hey, I'm the director of the Humanities and Medicine program at the Donald and Barbara Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra University in New York. And we actually bring in artists to, share some of their work to sort of shed light on the human side of medicine for our med students and our doctors in training. Would you be interested in performing your show? And I said, yeah. And she sort of took a chance on me. She had done her own sort of searching for one-woman shows on the internet. She found my page and it was just really good luck. And it fell in my lap. I had no idea that artists and performers worked with the medical community to sort of share their personal patient perspective to help them with maybe their training in the more emotional side of medicine. So obviously they're learning the science, they're learning the anatomy, all of that. But when it comes to actually being with a patient in the room, you're with a human. You're not with a, mannequin or something, And so I ended up performing in I think it wasn't until the next year, it was 2017, that I did the first performance for Hofstra's med students. And then I ended up sort of creating this relationship with her. Her name is Lisa Martin. She's amazing. She no longer works there, but she was very much a huge part of that program. And I then performed, Hofstra University is connected to Northwell Health, which is a big hospital system in New York. So I performed for their psychiatric hospital, Zucker Hillside Hospital. I did sort of other performances within Northwell Health, and then, performed for some national virtual conferences through the Northeast Group on Educational Affairs and the Association of American Medical Colleges. And, these different, there are big conferences for medical educators who are trying to use humanities as a teaching tool in medicine. Mm-hmm. So it's I had no idea this niche existed.
I didn't either.
I had no idea.
I'm just learning about this now.
Yeah. And it's a really beautiful thing, because I love performing for the public. It's a huge passion of mine. And there's something that sort of hits different about maybe making a positive impact on a future medical provider. Because as someone who was so heavily in the medical system, and I still am, not at the same level, but, you have doctors that are great, life-changing doctors. You also have doctors who won't look you in the eye, who deliver your diagnosis without emotion, that spend 2 seconds with you, that, the list goes on, of this lack of empathy and bedside manner and the lack of ability to really connect with the patient on a human level. And so maybe to have some sort of impact on future medical professionals is like a gift. I feel like it's like it's like my own way of sort of giving back. And I know that's sort of a corny phrase, but and after the show, I'd basically be a part of normally a panel discussion. Med students and PA students or nursing students would be able to ask questions, about their own experiences, in their own journey and education journey. And that was also a really great experience to have the performance and then this sort of reflection afterwards to sort of sum it up as a whole experience.
You're trying to come out. That is a whirlwind. So where were all the theaters you were in? That wasn't the only thing I heard. I was listening to everything, but you were in New York.
So I performed in theaters, Maryland, DC, New York, Scotland, and then I've done different virtual performances of my shows, like non-medical related and medical related.
How was the virtual? Was that during the pandemic?
Yeah.
So describe how. Because I know you have the theater, you have the energy of the crowd and stuff like that. So how is it going about giving a virtual performance? Because
it's so interesting. It's like you do have this screen that divides you from the audience. Right. I will say that it is almost your job as an artist and performer to sort of find a way to enhance your performance, to let it like permeate through that screen. And I think at the end of the day is, what it is that the content of that show is so charged emotionally that no matter if it's virtual or it's in person and live, if I let myself experience what I'm saying, the words and the emotions, and I put myself back in the shoes of Anna Snap at a younger age, being activated and triggered by these things, I think it's still effective. Maybe not as effective as it is live, but I had really positive responses even virtually. And I think that's because I allowed myself to go there, but also because I'm in a healed enough place that it didn't trigger me to go there. Because you need that kind of distance from it. If 10 years ago when I had PTSD, I could not perform about what was going on,
It's too close to home.
It's too close. Yeah. And so that also, like, back to the humor thing is like the more space you have from it, the more you can joke about it or whatever it is. So, yeah.
That's comedians, right? I feel like a lot of times with comedians, they're telling jokes, but I feel like from what I've seen, I could be completely wrong. This is me playing armchair psychologist. I feel there's a certain level of bitterness and jadedness that people that they're like, you can't see that I'm like, I have to laugh, but I'm not actually joking.
Yeah.
Like, I'm kind of telling the truth. I wish I could say this without a punchline, but people won't really take it that way because it might make them think a little bit too much. So I'm just going to be like, no, I'm just kidding. It's the same thing, but I'm really not, but I really am. So
yeah, it's like that. It's both at once. Yeah. And I mean, you have to laugh at some of this shit. Like, you have to laugh because it is so, sometimes it's so dark that it's so funny. Like, you know, it's like, sometimes you're like, oh, this is so absurd, you know? And that, I mean, I will say, like, my friends from treatment, I still have a couple like of my best friends from treatment, and our bond is sort of something that I can't really even describe. But if you saw our text threads, the dark jokes we make about all of this stuff is like, you know, it's curated for our experience. You can't say all these jokes to just anyone, but but it is just like, it is such a funny, beautiful thing in our relationship of being able to joke about all this stuff. Because I feel like it's a healer on its own.
No, definitely. But you not only had one, you had another, you had 2 shows, correct?
Yes. So basically, right before the pandemic, that same person, Lisa, from Hofstra.
Shout out to Lisa.
Shout out to Lisa Martin.
Respect.
We love her. She has truly changed my life, and you know, gave me this gift and this opportunity that like has been irreplaceable. And she's also just an incredibly lovely person and giving person. But she had sort of approached me and said, you know, the second year med students have this part of their curriculum on eating disorders. And I had myself experienced an eating, sort of a trauma-induced eating disorder many years ago. And, you know, I had said, you know, yeah, I do want to create another one-woman show. And so, excuse me, during the pandemic, I interviewed a ton of people of all ages, genders, backgrounds, about their experience with battling an eating disorder. And do you know what verbatim theater is?
I have no idea. No, I don't know what that is.
So verbatim theater is basically, it's also known as docudrama or documentary theater. So I basically recorded all of the interviews. I got them transcribed, and I would cut different pieces together to make like a monologue. And then I would memorize the audio. So if I interviewed Pam, age 36, and she had a Brooklyn accent and it was really high pitched and she paused a lot and she said a lot and she said like a lot, I would mimic exactly how her voice was to bring it to life on stage as if it's like a documentary on stage. And so in the show, which is called It's Not About the Damn Food, it explores sort of the misconceptions and miseducation surrounding eating disorders. It's not about food. It's about everything but food. And so I performed 9 different people's stories and then wove it into my own story. And that premiered again, you know, for the Donald and Barbara Zucker School of Medicine for their PA students back a couple years ago. And, you know, it's so interesting because it was just such a across the board, every single person I interviewed was like, it has nothing to do with the food. It's about so many things, and it's different for each person. So for some people it was, you know, which is a common thing you hear, it was their way of controlling their life. Maybe it was their way of making themselves smaller and more invisible. Maybe it was their way of, you know, feeling like they, you know, I don't know. It's just, it's so many different reasons. But, you know, for me, it was a form of self-protection and survival. And so it was really cool to weave those in. And it was honestly an activity for lockdown because it was, you know, this was like early stages of the pandemic where like, we didn't know if it was going to be 3 weeks or 3 years. And I was just sort of conducting them over Zoom, recording them. And then I would send it off to, you know, my, you know, colleague's husband who was a transcriber, and he would He would do them and send them back to me. And then I would sort of go through these like 2-hour interviews and pick out pieces. And it's a very lengthy process to memorize verbatim theater because you're literally memorizing the exact way they say things. But once you can do it, it is a very powerful experience because you really see the actor sort of transforming between voices, physicality, mood, vibe, you know, all of that. So yeah, it was 2 very different one-woman shows, but you know, both important in different ways, I think, in my own healing journey.
Absolutely. But props to you for having 2 though. I feel like doing like, I don't know much about theater, but I feel like being a theater actor is one thing too, but to say it's like, yeah, I have a one-woman show, but not just one of them. I have 2 of them. It's a little bit of a flex.
Thank you.
But in a good way though. I mean, how many people I'm kind of loud right now. How many people do you know you say, yeah, I have a one-person show?
You know, it's interesting.
You got to be interesting to pull it off. I don't feel like anyone can just do that's all the heavy lifting. I'm getting pretty passionate about this.
No, we love it.
All the heavy lifting's done for you. So that's a lot so again, it is a flex.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Cause you know what? I am proud of the work I've done and it has changed my life. And I think I sometimes, like you were talking about earlier with the imposter syndrome, I sometimes downplay it, I think a little bit. And it was, I think, the ultimate thing that saved my life was writing the first one and performing it and going through these cathartic experiences of sharing my story with people. It's sort of like the more you say things out loud into the universe, it changes things.
Yeah.
And so, and I also feel like I've been genuinely able to connect with people. And in some cases, people have told me that it's helped them hearing someone else say that they've been through this. Going back to our conversation earlier, not everyone has the opportunity to say, like, to share their story. And I feel like if I am able to and feel comfortable doing it, and if people in general do feel comfortable, then I hope they can feel empowered to share their story because it's going to help people in ways that you don't even know. It's like, you know, when you see yourself on screen or you see yourself on stage or in a podcast, whatever it is, and you go, me too. Me too. I went through that too. And like, thank God someone's talking about it because I felt so alone. And what's interesting is that during my darkest days, I've never felt so isolated. Honestly, my own emotional solitary confinement. And I realized that my experiences are not so unique. So many people go through this stuff, but you still feel alone. And so that's why I'm such an advocate for talking about this stuff, because it doesn't mean there's something that's wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you are less than or, you know, weird or different in a bad way. Like, I'm so glad I have this superpower because now I can handle things and I can know that like I survived, and that's like a gift and that's a strength.
A gift and a strength.
Yeah.
Speaking of, I definitely have to use the restroom right now.
You know, I might have to now too.
I think that might be my superpower. Just sensing when I have to use the restroom, or other people might have to. Weird superpower. I don't know if I'd recommend it, but yeah.
You want me to cut on this?
Yeah, you could cut on that.